see, my name's Jeff. Company is AMP Consulting. I had a chance to talk to you guys a little bit. A few of you. So what I want to do, as you can see on this, is I know the main topic is making the best first impression to retailers. And as we were talking about, I see this kind of a couple different ways. I know some of you are going to be pitching at HwM, so that's a little bit different in terms of kind of a rapid style and meeting with the retailers in a meeting there for however much time you get. So we'll talk some about that, my ideas on how you can make a best first impression, and also we'll just talk about when you actually go to the retailers and meet with the buyers. And what I think of in terms of how to make the best first impression is be prepared, right? Which is pretty obvious. So I think the best way to be prepared is to really understand the environment. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what the retail environment is, some of the aspects of a buyer meeting, some of the process, those kind of things. If you guys have any questions along the way, something I say doesn't make sense, just, we'll kind of keep this informal. Just a quick spiel on AMP. You can see some of the brands we've worked with here. And AMP is a group, there's 5 of us principals, and then we work with, I guess you could call it kind of a consortium. So we bring in some other parts that are under the umbrella, and it could be design, PR, marketing, things like that. I would say our core strengths are on the product development side. We have an office in Shenzhen. We have a couple other principals here who do the manufacturing, ideation, work through design. We're not a designer, but we have a group of designers that we work with. And the advantage there is, depending on what your product is, we can recommend a good designer, good engineering, and we sort of manage that project. I'm on the sales, business development side. My background is bringing products to retail. I've been doing that for about 20 years. I've worked for a couple pretty big companies. I've worked with a lot of startups, and now we kind of do a mix of startups and some larger companies. It's funny, I've actually been to this space before. I don't know if you guys know Pop Slate. They have, I think, still have an office just right around the corner here. We did some work with them in launching the Pop Slate too, and that was mostly on the product development and manufacturing side. This is just a slide to talk about some of the different things we've done. As I was saying, a lot of our focus has been on consumer electronics just because some of the brands we've worked with. We've done IoT, wearable tech. We've also done some health, lifestyle products, and even recently now I'm doing some ergonomic products and furniture. So in talking about making first impression with the retailer, I want to step back and talk about the retail landscape. And the reason I've kind of started talking about this is in working with incubators and some smaller companies, I've had some people ask me, why do I even need to go to retail, right? Like everything I hear about retail is terrible. It costs a lot of money, chargebacks, Walmart will put you out of business. And the reason I think retail still matters, which again, depending who you're talking to, some people, I think, younger people think, why can't I just put it on Amazon? Why can't I do pre-sales? One of the reasons retail still matters is, this is from 2015. I just saw the numbers from 2016. 8.1% of products are purchased online. That means 92% of products are still purchased in brick and mortar environments. And even though I'm in this industry, that's always surprising to me because I'm guessing, like you guys, you do a lot of your shopping online, right? I mean, if you had to ask me what my percentage was, I'd say, my God, just Amazon's probably 30-40%. But if you look at the US, not just where we live, kind of this bubble on the East Coast, but the whole country, 92% of sales are in brick and mortar. So you do need a strategy if you want to build a long-term, sustainable hardware company to go to retail. It doesn't mean you have to go to everyone, doesn't mean you have to be in Walmart, but you should understand how to get in there. Another thing I heard last year at a conference, somebody asked me, well, I just heard that Amazon passed Walmart. Well, Amazon last year passed Walmart in market cap, right? Which I think is a good indicator of what Wall Street thinks is going to be a good business 5-10 years from now. But the reality is, Walmart is still almost 5 times larger than Amazon. in terms of net sales, right? And that's just one retailer, Walmart. Granted, they're the biggest, but it kind of shows you, as much as we probably all spend a lot more money at Amazon than Walmart, that's not the case for the rest of the country. So again, these are just some quick slides to talk about why retail still matters. And again, if I'm doing it here in Silicon Valley, I think it's at least valid to mention because a lot of us probably aren't quite the norm for the rest of the country. The other thing I would say is, just because of course I'm going to be biased about selling retailers because it's what I do, but there's some other reasons too. You will see your online sales increase when you get offline presence, right? Because what you want are impressions. And a growing channel for the products we've done have been airport retailers. And you don't do a great volume at an airport retailer when you guys are going to the airport, InMotion, FYE, some of these people, but what you get are impressions, right? People are bored, they see it, maybe it sticks, right? It's almost a way of advertising, kind of a newer version of a QVC or something like that. So you can get brand awareness that you may not be able to quantitatively track right away, but I've seen some products, Fitbit, some products we did like the Jam Speaker and HMDX and some audio that even though our sales weren't great there, once we got some of these placements, the online sales continued to grow also. Experiential marketing, and I think a great example of that is the Amazon Echo, right? I mean, Amazon would prefer that you buy everything online. I mean, they're obviously the pioneer of that. But for Amazon to take what's going to be their flagship product and platform to the next level, they made a conscious decision to be in Best Buy, Target, Kohl's. They did a big push a year ago to get this product out there because they wanted people to get comfortable with it, to feel, touch and feel. And if Amazon thinks it's important to be in retail, then I think the rest of us should probably follow that, right? So the retail landscape, I like to talk about this because I think some people don't think about all the different channels that you can possibly take it to, right? So you come up with a hardware product, an IoT product, of course you're going to think of Best Buy and Apple stores and Amazon and Newegg and these places, but if you guys have been in a Lowe's or a Home Depot recently, right? I was in Lowe's a couple days ago. They have two separate end caps that are on connected home and IoT. There's two different places in Lowe's where you can get the Nest. That shows that they're moving to those kind of products. Now, I'm not saying whatever you guys might be working on, coming up with are right for that, but there are a lot of different channels that you might think of, and QVC is another one. They really started to sell a lot more electronic products and try to chase it because when they first put the Philips Hue on that, they did a big connected home thing about a year and a half ago. It did not do very well. Then they really started seeing sales increase other places, and they sort of kind of did a 180 on it, and they did a showcase on, I'm trying to remember exactly what they called it. It was not great in my opinion, but basically it was how can you make your home safer, right? And they did a big push that way. You're traveling, grandma lives by herself, these kind of things. And they did another big push in it, changing their messaging. And now, between Philips Hue, between the drop cam, some of those smart doors, it's a $10, $15 million category, QVC. It didn't exist there a year and a half ago, or bombed the first time. Some of the other ones, as you can see, wireless, food and drug. And the reason wireless and food and drug matter is because of the number of doors, right? There's 8,000 Walgreens. I mean, if you have a product that at some point in its lifestyle could make sense for them, they have more doors than Walmart here. So it's a big channel to consider. Quickly, let's talk about the retail structure. And again, getting back to the theme of this was how to make the best first impression. I think you can make a better impression when you sit down with a retailer if it seems like you kind of understand that retail space. And it can be hard to understand it if you haven't been in there. So it doesn't mean that you have to speak all the lingo or know all the acronyms or show off to them. But if somebody casually mentions a DM or a GM or a planner or a system planner, you can at least know what that person's role is within the structure. This here was actually taken from a department store, and that's really where this comes from because the oldest retail stores in the US obviously are department stores. And this pretty much holds true with a little bit of variation across Costco, Target, Best Buy, whatever. The GMM is really the top the VP of retail at a store. So at Best Buy, there's a GMM, and then there's a lot of DMMs, or sometimes that'll be shortened to DMs. And then if you look at just one, here this is sportswear. Let's say at Best Buy it was, it wouldn't be electronics, but it could be audio, right? So underneath audio, you will have a handful of buyers, right? This one could be portable audio, this one could be Bluetooth, this one could be something else, and then you have assistant buyers and planners. And typically when you meet with the retailer, you'll probably meet with the buyer and an assistant buyer. There might be, depending where you're at, a planner or maybe a buyer from another category, and maybe the DM will stop by, but mostly you'll be meeting with the buyers. A planner is really, when you get in there, they do the allocation, right? So they're gonna meet with you and say, all right, are we doing a 100-store test? Are we rolling it out chain-wide? What's the timing? Do we have all the pricing right? The assistant merchandiser, the assistant buyer and the planner will work on in-store signage, end caps, those kind of things.
So who are the decision makers in this process there?
So that's a good point, and I think I'll touch on it later, but we can do it here. So there are some commonalities, and obviously when I'm talking about retail, I'm just kind of making generalizations, even though there are obviously differences. So let's talk about Target. Target is pretty interesting. So if you go meet with Target, we did a wearable tech product there last year. So in that meeting, there was a buyer, there was an assistant buyer, and then there was a category manager. And the weird thing with Target is, and it's this way at a few places, Walmart, Sam's Club a little, maybe BJ's, there's a category manager in that meeting who is responsible for that category, who does not work for Target. This woman who's in there works for a company called Griffin, not Griffin Technology, but Griffin Marketing. They're a rep group. They rep Fitbit and a few other products to Target. This rep group provides an in-house employee. It's a weird relationship. So in that meeting, you have the buyer, you have the other two people. What she'll do, you show her the product, she likes it, she asks a lot of questions. She will take that product, and I'm going to cut out some of the steps, but what she'll do is she'll take it to line review, right? So at the end of the month, she'll sit in a room with some other buyers, DMs, maybe the GM, and she'll present her product to different categories, right? Maybe the TV buyer, maybe personal care, and they'll ask questions, right? What's the price on this? Why would someone buy that? What's the margin? Why would they buy this and not a Fitbit, right? If it gets past that stage, Target in downtown Minneapolis, pretty new building, their second floor is a store, but it's empty. It's a store that's laid out, but it's not a real store, right? So she has her 24-foot section, and she will make it up, along with the category manager, again, who doesn't work for Target, and the assistant buyer, and they will do the 24-foot thing, right? So they'll put the product there, they'll mock up some signage, they'll put the pricing, and then they'll do a walkthrough. And Target works a little bit different. Best Buy will update their inventory kind of monthly. Target does their full line reviews maybe twice a year. So for this wearable tech thing, we were there in January. In March, they did the line review. And you walk through the store, you stay in your section, the GM, some of the DMs, some of the different buyers come through, and they ask them. They walk into the thing and they say, what does this do? They look at the packaging, right? Target has a rule that 2 to 3 seconds is all people are going to look at. So how much information, what they call their customers or their guests, what can they get from that? So I know that's kind of a deep dive, but it's good to know, because when you sit down with the buyer, a lot of them can't say yes, but they can say no, right? So part of your job in making that good first impression is helping them sell it, because you only get that time frame there, and then you'll have some interaction with them. And if you're using a rep group like we were, that's great, because they're in there all the time. But you need to educate them so that when their DM comes and says, who would pay $79 for this? You've given them the information, well, this competitive product's $99, and it's sold this much, and this is the use case, those kind of things. So, again, I'm just using Target as an example. They're one of the hardest in terms of not having a lot of line reviews and being harder to get products into. And again, some of it's a function of how big is the store, right? There's 2,000 Targets. You've got to lock it down, that planogram, so that when they roll out a new product, it can be seamless to the stores. Best Buy, 1,000, 1,200 stores, they have more flexibility to have variation, just because that's the way their supply chain works. Does that make sense? I know it's a lot of information, I'm just throwing out there, but as I said here, help them sell it, because when you leave, you lose the ability to sell the product, right? And I've had some where the buyer loves it, they go to bat for it, but they're not really that invested in it, so if the GM or DM starts poking holes in it, they're not going to go to war for you, so you need to really give them as much information as you can to help them sell it. And then in talking about buyers, I put empathy on here because it's kind of a catch-all, and this, I think, goes for whatever you're doing, right? Let's say you're going in front of a VC and you're trying to pitch your company. Of course, you're going to think, what is this person I'm meeting with? What makes them tick? What makes them drive? So I would say do the same thing with the buyer. It's important to know, and this is where, again, a rep group can be really helpful, because most rep groups, the reps who were there, or at least a lot of their offices, used to be buyers at those places. So the rep group that, I've worked with a few, but the one I probably use the most in Minneapolis, the women I work with there, one was a buyer at Target, one was a DM at Best Buy, so they really understand that. So you can kind of pick their brain. But I can ask them in this category, what do they get graded on, right? How do they get, at the end of the year, how is their performance done? Is it just profit? Is it new SKUs? Is it how many units they moved? Is it low return rates, right? And so if you know all of that, you can kind of build it in, right? So if margin is the most important thing, then you might build in a little bit more margin to your product. Or if having high returns rate really dings them, then you can figure out ways to work that into your program. The other thing with buyers is they move categories a lot. A lot of retailers do it on purpose because they don't want the buyers getting too cozy with those lines, just because of the scandals that have happened. Certainly at Walmart in the 80s and early 90s, Fry's recently, that PC buyer, they estimated it was $60 million it was embezzled. So you need to understand, like I said, that they move a lot. The Target buyer I was telling you about, Etta was at Target for 7 years, and 2 weeks after we got the project, then she quit. She left and went and did something else, which is great. They do that a lot. The other thing, geographic. A lot of these retailers, you'll notice we're talking about, are based in Arkansas, Minneapolis, Wisconsin, New Jersey. They may have different experience than we do, right? We have an experience living here in California or wherever we live. Theirs can be a little bit different. So just think of that as you're going in, some of your references, some of the things you're talking about, how you're trying to sell them, because they have a different reality. The other stuff kind of makes sense in terms of understanding their customer, psychographic, what makes them tick. All right, so what we usually do in terms of figuring out, and we talked a little bit about this, the best way I think to be prepared is, hopefully you can do this 3, 6, 9 months out. But what I tell people I work with is kind of start at the end, right? So even if you're just coming up with a product like you are now, right? And you don't want to even be in front of this retailer for 9 months. One thing you can do to make sure you're going to be prepared when you get there is look at what the parts of that presentation are. So it's kind of starting at the end and working backwards. And I'll explain what I mean as I go through this. So the first thing is, and we talked about this, who's your customer, right? 5 W's, it sounds pretty basic, but actually sit down and think about it. Who is my customer, right? Here's something I've noticed in doing this for almost 20 years. Every person I've worked with pretty much thinks their customer is kind of them, right? Because they design something that's interesting to them, it's their baby, they know it, they like it. So if I'm talking to a 40-year-old woman and I say, who's your customer? It usually kind of looks like a woman in her mid-30s or 40s or a guy. But if you're doing a product that can greatly simplify people's home storage, right? And if one of the killer apps is photos, videos, these kind of things, you might think the customer in my house is me, but it's probably my wife, because she's the one who feels that pain, even if I'm going to be expected to install it or figure it out. So who is your customer? Where is your customer? What do they buy? How do they buy, right? So it's figuring out Once I kind of know who my customer is and decide, and it goes back to the channels, where do they buy? We all buy on Amazon, we buy at Best Buy, we go to Apple Store, but is it possible that our customer would buy this at Newegg or Costco or Sam's Club or a regional chain like H.H. Gregg or PC Richards or BrandSmart? So those are the kind of things you want to start well in advance, because if it's going to dictate some of your messaging, your product, these kind of things, you can't figure that out 2 or 3 weeks before the meeting. You need to figure that out well before. And in terms of the retailer, can your product be tied to a larger product? The example I gave here is we worked on something, and as we were doing it, we were probably 6 months out, but Target launched their Target Innovation Lab, and they wanted to have the ability to bring in some people earlier, right? So it's understanding where your customer buys it, and can you tie into something. Target did that. Trying to think, I just saw, who was it? Not Radio Shack. It'll come to me. There's another retailer that's was an unexpected one that's doing the same thing. So getting back to that buyer presentation, again, starting early is great, because you can't figure out, let's say you're going to HardwareCon in a couple weeks, you can't figure out right now, how's your company going to fulfill, right? That's something a buyer's going to want to know, right? So when you talk to them, they're going to say, do you have a distribution partner? Do you have a warehouse? What's the timeline for things being ordered? So start that as early as you can, at least to understand what that's going to mean to you in terms of being able to deliver, what your cost's going to be. Financial is another key one. They're going to want to know, you're at Best Buy, we give you an order for 10,000 units. Are you going to be able to produce it? Well, everyone says yes, but if your cost in China is $30, right? And your opening order is $10,000, that's $300,000, right? You have to give them that order, let's say January 1st. It gets produced by, let's say, maybe it's ready to ship by March 1st, right? It's a month on the water, April. It gets to their warehouse mid-April. Maybe they don't even put it in their inventory system end of April, right? And then if you have net 60 terms, now you're into June, right? So yeah, I can come up with a couple $100,000, let's say, through funding or this and that, but you need to make sure you know you're not going to get that money back for 6 months. And the buyers want to make sure you understand what the terms are going to be, those kind of things. And again, that's something you need to know well in advance, which is why I say you should start with kind of your presentation as far out as you can so that you can make some changes along the way. And in terms of that presentation that you guys will use for, the people we use for a retailer, there's no magic thing to it. If you've ever seen a presentation at a VC, or you're doing a pitch contest, right? It's all the same basic things. Who is the company? You know, who are the key people? Have I understood the marketplace? Who are my competitors? Why would someone buy this? A presentation to a buyer is the same basic thing, with just a couple things that I'll touch on. So doing a market analysis, I think, is always important, and a competitive analysis. And again, the reason I say you need to do this a lot in advance is if you do this exercise 6 months before you meet with the buyer, you may come up with some features that you want to put in there that can help differentiate you. Whereas, if it's right before it, you can. So another important part about making a good impression is understanding retail at least a little bit in terms of the margin, right? So you guys know what MAP is, that's the minimum advertised price, right? So you're meeting with Best Buy, they're like, do you sell on Amazon? They're gonna ask that of everybody. And the reason they're worried about it is Amazon and people who sell on there are notorious for lowering the price. Someone else can steal that buy box from you, right? Someone else who has your product somehow can steal it. And if your MAP, your minimum advertised price is $99 and someone puts it on $89 on Amazon and that buyer sees it at Best Buy, Apple, wherever, they're going to want to have that price at $89 also. So you need to let them know that you do have a MAP policy, you're going to enforce it, and no one will be able to get that product at whatever retailer you meet with cheaper somewhere else. That's a huge thing now, and I can't tell you how many meetings I've been in where someone can just get out their phone. A buyer can just pull out the phone, and go on Amazon and type in your product, or just Google it, and if you did Pre-order on your website, it's probably gonna come up, right? Well, why does it say 69? You're trying to sell it to me for 89. The other thing, margin, right?
Excuse me?
Sure.
You can dictate to Amazon like, this is my map.
You can. You control the listing. The problem is when your product gets out there a little bit, if you don't control the buy box, it can be tough. And if somebody else puts a price lower, they can get that buy box. So yeah, it can be tricky. And there's some different strategies there, but if it's a newer company, you're usually pretty safe. I mean, the ones who get killed on map are more the commodity type prices. The ones who are really driving it, right? GoPro and Fitbit and Beats and big brands, because they know that people get kind of paralyzed, and maybe you guys have seen this too, right? You're like, all right, I'm gonna break down and buy whatever this product is. I'm getting that GoPro, right? And then you see one price here, and you see a little lower there. Anything that causes indecision is probably gonna keep you from making that purchase, right? And if that's spread out among a lot of people. The reverse is why it's been Costco's model for 20 years. Costco only wants to have a product in for a short amount of time, so that when you walk into Costco and you see that GoPro bundle or whatever, you know, if I don't buy this now, it might not be here in a couple weeks, right? It's kind of the reverse of that. In terms of margin, depending on your product and depending what retailer it is, you're gonna have a big range, right? So I'll use that wearable tech example. If you say to the buyer, what's your margin in this category? They'll say, as much as we can get, right? They're hoping to get probably 40 or 45 points, right? So with Fitbit, they're probably only getting 30 points, but you're not Fitbit. So what I usually do in terms of pricing is I just start with the retail. And some people like that, some people don't. But as you're coming up with your product, you know what it's going to sell at, right? You have an idea at least. If this is at $99, we're going to be good. So you can, in your presentation, you can say this is going to retail for $99. And then the buyer hopefully will just assume, okay, they know that they're going to probably have to sell it to me for 60 landed or something like that. So you don't need to know exactly, but when they talk margin and things like that. And then there's margin and there's net, which is kind of an important distinction at retail. So if you have a 40-point program with Best Buy, it's probably a 45-point net, which means they're going to deduct 1% to 2% off invoice for terms, right? They're going to deduct maybe 2 to 3% for marketing, co-op, might be for return allowance. So retail makes a lot of money in that space between the margin you give them and what they actually pay you, right? So if they're paying you $50 wholesale for each one, chances are your invoice is going to be about $45 for each one, because they deduct things off that. And that's something the buyers get graded on too. You don't have to have finished packaging when you do that first meeting. If you guys have a chance to meet them hard work on in a couple of weeks, you can have PDFs, you can have mock-ups. You just need to be able to talk about what your strategy is, right? It doesn't have to be all ironed out, but you need to explain that you've thought of it. And most retailers are going to ask you, how are you going to drive people to my store, right? Best Buy buyer will tell you, unless someone comes into my store to buy your product, they're probably not going to get it, unless it's holiday. And then you have a little more leeway. But their thinking is people walk in looking for hopefully a specific product, but at the very least, a specific category, right? So you need to have a strategy for how you're going to drive people there. And it could be social media, it could be some grassroots stuff. You could say, I'm going to devote X% to doing some regional marketing, these kind of things. But you need to at least have given that a thought, so when they ask you that, you can tell them something. It doesn't have to be ironed out. You don't have to say I have a $10 million ad spend, but you need to explain. Also, when you're talking about the messaging, you really need to understand who your customer is. So you need to tell them, because my customer is this. And if you've sold online before, that's great, because you can say 60% of purchases were male, 40% of that was over 40. So our messaging, our marketing is targeting these different things because we know this data.
What kind of expectation do you have from your marketing?
It depends. It really varies. They'll say,
do they expect you to have a nationwide campaign or something? No.
No, it kind of depends on the category. If you tell them, it depends where you are. Like, I mean, I've had some where I've said, this company has 100,000 email addresses because they did a Kickstarter campaign. or because they did pre-orders, this kind of thing, then you can at least say, we have a marketing campaign around that, Facebook ads. I mean, they can be pretty targeted. So they won't beat you up for the specifics initially. You don't have, again, if you're going in there, they know you're not Fitbit or GoPro, but you do need to have a strategy that could even be regional.
How about exclusivity? You know, I go to Target and I say, I'm only going to give it to you. Is that something I can bargain with?
Yeah, although I don't see it as much in this market here, I think just because, you know, if you look at so many, and this has changed probably in the last 10 years, so many retailers, retail products in that, I'd say 75% of them, you could buy that product on that person's website, right? Like I can buy Beats on Apple's website, on Beats' website, but Target's still going to carry it, or any other retailer. Now, that's an example, obviously, a very high-end line. So I don't think exclusivity is great. Where you see it is in some different channels. Best Buy Canada, they always want to do an exclusive, 2 or 3 months. They don't have a ton of competitors up there, but for some reason, that's one I see a lot. If you get into the wireless channel, then if you can give AT&T something that they think, you know, will be good, and you say, we're not going to roll it out to Verizon until the third quarter or something like that. That I've seen, but I don't see much of it with the national retailers. So briefly, I just want to touch on a few things. Talked a little bit about the QVC one. It was an interesting example of selling the experience. And the reason I mention it, and some of this was, I talked at an IoT thing, and I think a lot of people, again, as you're building a hardware product, or you're working with some friends who do, is to get kind of focused on what that product is and how amazing the tech is and how it solves this problem. But really, when you see products succeed, it's because they sell the experience, right? So GoPro, it's not the greatest camera. Those cameras existed, but GoPro never once, that I can remember, told me much about the camera, right? They told me what I was going to do for my life, right? My son's going to be able to record and share when he goes snowboarding. When you go in, and they do a great job with their displays, airport stores, and all the consumer electronics, it's always some guy jumping off a cliff or skiing or riding a motorcycle, right? It's never this quality picture, this format size, this thing. So again, sell the experience and don't just cram features. And I've been guilty of it with products I've worked on, where you go, we added this, we added this, we added this. And they're not as concerned about that. Buyers aren't either. But what problem does it solve? Why would people buy it, right? Now, I don't know what problem, let's say, GoPro solves, except maybe one that a lot of fashion ones do. It makes you cooler, it makes you funner, gives you a better, lifestyle.
Well, it breaks down when you go on the scuba diving trip.
Right.
They're like, no.
Yeah, and for people who really know the technology, and I don't claim to be one, it's not going to win, but you can sell the experience. The other thing is iteration. Whatever you guys make or working on, or your friends are, it's your baby, right? And it's got to be perfect when you get it out there. And that can be a problem. I think it's better, and the iPhone's a good example. GoPro, that first GoPro, it's kind of a clunker. Get it out there in the market, learn some things. Hopefully you've got the runway, you've got support, you can iterate. And I really think that's key. You don't have to solve every single problem because it can kind of paralyze you. The other thing, trends, again, what can you tie into that retailers are doing? When I was selling, when we were doing this wearable tech product, if I said IoT, smart home, and wearable tech, I could pretty much get a meeting anywhere because those were the buzzwords they were hearing. I'm not saying you have to change what you're doing, but be dishonest or whatever your product is, but the things that you tie into that they do well. Sometimes security is hot, sometimes IoT. A lot of these buyers are just kind of learning these phrases. If you can tie into those things, it can help you get that meeting, it can help your meeting, because again, you're trying to help that buyer sell, right? So the target buyer went into her planning meeting and she said, it controls, for this band that we did, it controls your smart devices, it's IoT, it's wearable tech, it's for teens, there's nothing like it, and everybody was like, I'm not sure I know what all that means, but we want to be in that business. Just a few other points like we talked about. When the Belkin Wemo came out, it did not do well. It got some good space because it's Belkin, but people said, hey, it's a smart plug, you're gonna love it. It didn't do that well. They changed their whole campaign and they said, from your phone, control your coffee maker, your light, whatever you can plug in, right? Sell the experience. Then it really started to take off. Already talked about knowing customer. Validation, I think, is very important. The echo chamber, which I talked about, and I'm as guilty of it as anybody, but when you get input, I think it's good. A hardware group like this is great, but a lot of us are pretty similar. So one thing I've seen in some of these is where you can do your pitch or you can do your thing, and people can kind of leave anonymous comments, right? Because it's hard. My personality is I'm gonna ask a few questions, whatever, but if it's somebody's dream and they say, I love this, you're gonna be like, yeah, I mean, but there might be some good constructive criticism, so kind of get out of that echo chamber if you can, right? Another one I've seen is that whole field of dreams, right? If you build it, they will come. And I'm gonna build this thing, and because it makes complete sense to me, people come. Do it the other way around. Start from who is your end customer, where would they buy it, why would they buy it, how much would they pay? And again, I know these are more factors in bringing hardware to market, but these are the kind of questions in different ways that you might get from a retail buyer. Some of them are very nice, some of them don't do much, and some of them love to kind of challenge you. Why would anyone buy this? Do you know who my customer is? Tell me why they buy it, right? And so if you've done some of that research in advance, and also try to find out who you're meeting with, what their customer is, because a Best Buy buyer will tell you that their customer is different than a Target buyer. And I don't know that it is that much, but. And that's pretty much it.